Hello, good afternoon. People are joining from the waiting room. Thank you all for being so prompt I don't know if this is what it feels like to all of you, but today feels like the first day of work of 2025. So it is, yes, welcome back. I hope that the fog of the end of the year rush is starting to lift. It's nice to see some of your faces, especially hi to Valerie. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Um, Feel free to have your camera off or on, whatever is the most comfortable to you. The format of this webinar is going to be us sharing for about the first 20 minutes, providing a brief overview of the grant program, and then we'll dive into the content about creating the budget. So we'll be doing a lot of screen shares at the beginning of the meeting. So it's a great time to have your camera off if you want a little break. And then we'll do the majority of the webinar will be open Q&A. So you can certainly feel free to bring your camera off during that time. And you might notice that the chat function has been disabled in this meeting. We'd prefer you use the Q&A feature. That should be down at the bottom of your screen in your Zoom navigation bar. And that just allows us more easily to track the questions that are coming in because we do sift through those afterwards and quite a few of them get posted to the Q&A on our website. So it just makes it a little bit easier for us to capture that information if you use the Q&A instead of the chat to post your question. So with that, it looks like we're at a pretty good number, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to do just a brief overview of the grant program for those of you who may not have joined us for any of our previous webinars. I just want to take a couple of minutes to ground us in what this grant is about, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dawn. So for people joining us a little bit later, you won't miss any of the brand new content. So I want to start by saying good afternoon and welcome. My name is Deb Vaughn. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the grants manager for the competitive grant program here at Travel Oregon. I've been working in philanthropy for over 15 years and joined the team at Travel Oregon in August. I am joined by two of my fantastic colleagues, Dawn Smallman, who you'll hear from a little bit later. She is, I've invited her to be I would call her the resident expert, but I think we share a passion for these conversations about strong project budgets. So maybe co-conspirator is a better brand for Dawn. And then April Knudsen is also on the Zoom and can help if there are technical issues or questions that you have. She'll also help us manage the Q&A, but I think she's staying camera off today as she's recovering from not feeling well over the weekend. So thank you, April, for being here. Let's go ahead and move into the content. So I want to start with the technical eligibility components so that you make sure if you are considering an application to the competitive grant program that you're in the right place. That being said, the content that we'll be presenting later about strong budgets is actually applicable to a variety of different grant programs. So do feel free to stay for that, even if you're not considering an application in this cycle. However, for the competitive grant program, for the LOIs that are due by 5 p.m. on January 15th, which is next week, the most important factor is that you are an organization that is in one of the categories listed on the slide, and that you are doing direct work in support of improving the economic impacts of Oregon's travel and tourism industry. So those four types of organizations are local governments, port districts, federally recognized tribes, and nonprofit entities that are registered with the Oregon Secretary of State's office. I call out that last part specifically because if you are not current with the Oregon Secretary of State's office at the time of your LOI submission, you may not be able to get that listing updated by the time applications are due next month. So it's essential that you verify your status ahead of time so you're not wasting your time with an LOI that we can't fund because that status is out of date. I also, I will post in the chat the link to check your registration status so that you can verify that if you're not sure where to do it. Also, I want to emphasize that only one application may be submitted per entity and only one proposal may be submitted per project. So in other words, multiple entities may not request funding for the same project through this program. If you have questions about that, please reach out to me separately. I'm happy to talk about how partners and their support can show up in these grant applications. So this is a little slice into my brain and how I think about this grant program. The goal at the top that Oregon is known as a welcoming destination for all is really the long-term vision of what we can do together. And this is, of course, aligned with Travel Oregon's long-term strategic plan. And I would guess for most of those eligible organizations that are coming in for support in this category, it's also connected to your long-term vision. The next level of the objective is the near-term measurement that we've set as a priority for this funding cycle. So that is to increase access and inclusion. So all competitive proposals in this grant cycle need to be working on that objective. You need to be measuring an increase in access and inclusion through the funds that are awarded in this cycle. And then more specifically are the strategies that we've identified as the available ways to reach that objective of increased access and inclusion. There are two strategies that are available. One is to apply for an infrastructure project, and there are some examples on the screen of what those might entail, or an applicant may apply for a marketing project, but you do have to choose one or the other. I want to highlight the words enhance, expand, and promote. Those are statutory regulations for this grant program. So all of the funds that we do must fall under one of those three categories, which is why you see this program model connect sequentially the way that it does. So infrastructure projects might enhance tourism activities. They might, by improving on a visitor experience, or they might expand opportunities, create something that doesn't exist, or reach a new audience by modifying a service. On the other hand, marketing projects fall under the category of tourism promotion, and that would be sharing an asset that already exists, but probably sharing it with a new audience. So marketing or infrastructure efforts that increase access and inclusion to visitors that identify as part of one or more of the communities listed in the state of Oregon's DEI action plan. So we do want to see some connection to communities in that plan that maybe haven't always been part of Oregon being known as a welcoming destination. And we want to help you think about that for all component of the welcoming destination through this grant program. All right, this is an important component because this is the timeline. The first date has already passed. That's when we opened up the LOI for submissions. You have until January 15th to support an LOI, to submit an LOI. And then if invited, you will need to prepare a full application by February 27th. Let's see, what I wanted to say is the earlier you submit an LOI, the more time you have to think about an application, because we do review those in the order that they're received, and you do need our approval before you can move into the full application phase. I do want to emphasize that not all LOIs will be invited to submit a full application. So sometimes the most common reason we find is that the applicant is not eligible, but we also do sometimes identify that the project is not a strong fit with the grant program. And because our goal is to assure that you're spending your time wisely on an application, sometimes a no is our redirect for other opportunities. So we will certainly try to help support your project, give you some resources that you might be able to draw on to move the work forward. And a no this cycle doesn't necessarily mean that we aren't interested in talking to you about future proposals as well. I know some funders have really strict requirements about that, but here at Travel Oregon, every cycle is an opportunity for us to engage with community and hear about what's important to you and how you're moving to accomplish your goals. All of the application questions and LOI questions are available in the grant guidelines document, which I'll also put in the chat if you haven't looked at those prior to now. So you can start thinking ahead about how you might respond to application questions, even at this early date. I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Just noting that funding decisions will be announced in June and projects must be completed in November. So that timeline for projects, it's work that needs to take place between June 17th and November 3rd of 2026. So more than a year from now, it's about 17 months. All right, this is my last slide before I turn it over to Dawn, but I just want to draw your attention to the guidelines again that are in the chat, that the page 4 of the guidelines lists types of projects that we're interested in supporting, but that list is not comprehensive. So we are open to project ideas that align with the categories of tourism infrastructure and tourism promotion, but maybe that we haven't considered in the list, but they do need to make a connection to one of those two areas. Some brief examples of infrastructure projects that we could support in this program is efforts to develop culturally relevant programming products or materials, adaptation of existing services to provide sensory-friendly experiences, or improvement and innovation of signature events to be more welcoming. Some examples of tourism promotion projects that we could consider supporting in this program are FAM tours with a focus on expanding relationships with new populations, and or support for influencer or ambassador marketing efforts. Again, there's a longer list in the guidelines if you want to take a look, but that is where I'm going to conclude my overview and turn it over to Dawn.
Thanks, Deb. Hi, everybody. Great to see you all here today. So many folks. I think we've got 35 folks. Wow. Thank you for your interest in this grant and for coming today to hear a little bit of our thoughts about how to create a strong budget as part of your application proposal, which hopefully you'll get past the LOI stage and you'll be submitting the application proposal, but you'll need to submit the budget anyhow in the LOI stage. So it's really good stuff to be thinking about. So first off, I just want to tell you that my background is not in accounting. I think this always puts some folks who are nervous about budgeting at ease to know that the person talking to them about budgeting came to this work as a grants professional through trying to fund my own projects in my former life as a professional artist. So you are more than welcome to call and tap Deb's and my brains if you have questions about budgeting, but just know that we both come from an arts background, so you will not be talking to folks who will scare you with accounting terminology. And so, you know, what I'd like to do is sort of like with that in mind, back out and say, like, how do you start? I'm assuming there's a lot of folks here who are maybe new to budgeting or new to, maybe it's your first time even brand new to budgeting, filling out a form. So Deb and I have put our brains together and thought about how best to get you started. And I would make the recommendation, of course, to do what Deb already put that link in the chat, to do what Deb also recommended, to read that guidelines document all the way through. That first is going to set you up to know whether the project that you're thinking about applying for is in the realm of being appropriate for this grant or not to waste your time if it's not, right? So that will also give you some guidelines about what you can and can't spend money on inside that guidelines document. So it's really good before you can begin budgeting to read all the way through the grant guidelines. And then I'm going to give you some practical advice for how to begin budgeting, and that is to make 3 lists. Make a list of, well, first of all, you're going to read through the LOI application or the grant application if you're moving on to the full grant application. And there's going to be narrative questions there, like describe your project. And obviously, this is the kind of like what you want to do, who you want to do it with, why it's important to do it, and how it aligns with the purpose of this grant. That last part, I can't emphasize enough. You always want to be returning back to the question of how whatever you're putting in narrative answers or in the budget answers, how it aligns with the purpose of this grant. And that's sort of your roadmap, right? And most of our brains work a little bit better in the storytelling mode than in the budget numbers mode and budget form mode. So you're kind of crafting first for yourself this roadmap of your story, of your project, how you're going to do it, why it's important to get on the road and get the work done. Then make 3 lists. Make a separate list. Just these aren't lists that will be included, you know, turned into Travel Oregon as part of your application. These are just lists for you. A list of all the expenses or costs that you're going to incur along that road to make that project. A list of all the donated goods, services, or volunteer labor that you think that is going to come your way during the course of this project. You'll also hear us use the phrase in kind. That's what we're referring to. An in-kind item in the grant world means a donated goods, service, or volunteer labor that's assessed at a labor hourly rate. And then the third list would be a list of all the cash contributions you expect to receive, including if your own organization is going to put a cash contribution to help support the project. And those lists are really great to go into having those intact going into looking at your budget form. And one of the things that Deb and I really want folks to hear today is that your anything that's big and important enough to make a significant part of your answer in your narrative should definitely show up in your budget form too, and vice versa. So be checking those two documents before you turn them in back and forth against each other to make sure that if you're saying it one place, you're saying it in the other, and you're putting a dollar amount on it. Because reviewers will sometimes raise questions, such as if one thing appears in the budget or not in the narrative answers, or vice versa. It just opens up questions. And your job as a grant applicant is to close all the holes for the questions and make things really clear for folks.
Dawn, can I jump
Okay.
in just and
Yeah.
offer one little nuance about the language about in kind? On the slide, it says expected donations known as in kind, and this is absolutely accurate. Donated goods or services or volunteer labor all would be counted as in kind, i.e., non-tangible, non-cash donations. That being said, you may also be receiving cash donations. I've seen some budgets as in my reviews today where there are certainly cash donations coming from external donors, right, to a nonprofit organization that are listed in the cash column. And an in-kind would be a donation of something that isn't cash, that doesn't go into your bank account, but goes into your hand, goes right into your organization, or goes into service, as in volunteer labor.
Thanks for that, Deb. And we'll talk a little bit more about in-kind too and how to lay that out in the budget form. So if it sounds good to you, Deb, I'm going to screen share the budget
All
form.
right, I will stop sharing so you can have access to that.
Oh, it just gave me a big exclamation point. Okay, hang on. Maybe I hit the button too quick.
Nobody wants Zoom to give them a big exclamation point. During this pause, while we're not talking, feel free to use the Q&A feature if you have questions that are coming up.
Okay, hang on. I think I have to, all participants can share. Sorry, folks. Nope, not seeing that it's allowing me. Maybe you have to enable me, Deb. Try it from your side.
Yep, maybe
Share.
Spotlight. Looks like you should be able to. I've got it set for everyone. But Dawn, if it's a matter of walking through the budget template, I can also certainly share that.
Hang on, let me see if that's one thing. Nope. Nope. Yeah, why don't you share? Sorry, I don't know why it's being finicky. It's just giving me a big exclamation point.
Yep, no problem. And then you just you boss me around and I will navigate where you need me. Let me go. I'm going to make this full screen over here and make sure that I am sharing that.
Thank you for the help.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry.
Thanks for bearing with us, folks. All right, Dawn, are you seeing the budget template?
Not yet.
You are screen sharing. Ugh. This is fun. I'm so glad we recorded this. This will be really fun to watch later, I'm sure. All right, let's try it. Let me try it one more time. There we go. I think that will be better. All right, hopefully that gives us what we want.
I'm not seeing it. Are other folks? Oh, there we go. All right.
It's just on a little bit of a lag, so okay.
Cool. Can you, well, this is a good place to start. Actually, well, folks can see there's a number of tabs in this budget document. And as Deb, I think, mentioned, you're required to use our budget document. So along with that may come some, you may have some challenges like, well, I wish it looked like this, or I wish it was different. Please do not modify it. It will cause your grant application to not be eligible for consideration. So if you have any questions, again, just reach out to us if there's some reason that you're having trouble using it. But sometimes people will like download it and modify it and move it around, move things around inside and then turn it back into us. And I don't think they realize that that will make them ineligible. So just use it as is. And it's pretty easy to use. You'll see first off that there's these tabs down at the bottom, the red, yellow, and green and purple tabs. That's the that shows you instructions for how to fill out the budget, a sample budget, the budget template, which is mostly what we're going to focus on today, and then the receipts tracker. At this point, ignore the receipts tracker. That's a component of the budget that folks who receive the grant and then are turning in invoices to get access to the grant funds, they have to fill it out and turn receipts in. So ignore the receipt tracker altogether. And let's focus on the grant budget template. So you can see that there are a couple different portions. Hang on, I'm going to move something around from my own view. There are a couple different portions of this budget. So you can see that there's a sort of a dark gray bar in column E, and that kind of separates what I'm going to call the left-hand side of the budget from the right-hand side of the budget. And so that is the budget estimate to the left. That's in column C and D. Thanks, Deb, for highlighting those. And that is your budget estimate side. To the right of that gray bar, the actual, which is in column F and G, that is how the project actually turned out, how the expenditures turned out. So for when applying for the grant with us, or the LOI with us, you want to be focused on the left-hand side of the budget estimate. So columns C and D, and then you'll also hear us call things line items sometimes. And that would mean like simply, if you go in the far left, you'll see there's numbers over there to the left of column A, and those are just one line with an item listed on it. That's what, if you hear us say that line item, that's what we're talking about. Applies to any line. Okay. So let's also talk about the top to the bottom of the budget. So you'll see that there is income sources in line item 2. And that's going to give you all the income that you're expecting to come in to fund this project. This includes the grant's award funding, and you'll see that goes on line number 5. The grant request, you want to be writing in that cash under the budget estimate, the left-hand side. So fancy grant language here, we would call that column C, line 5, because it's the intersection of those 2 points. That's where you want to put the amount of funding that you're requesting into that cell, that block there, where the grant request is designated, okay? And then you'll see that there's other lines, line 7 through line 16, for other income that you expect to come in and fund the project. So sometimes the income, as Deb alluded to earlier, will come in as cash. If it does come in as cash, let's say you want to put $1,000 of your own organization's cash in, you would put that in the budget estimate, left-hand side of the budget, under the cash on one of the lines, line 7 through line 15. And you want to let us know what it is. You want to itemize it in column B. So you would say, the name of your organization's cash contribution to support project, and under the cash part, you put $1,000. Now, let's say you have some of that stuff that we're talking about that would be in kind. Let's say that you're applying for, say, a promotional project, right? To do some marketing and promotions, and you've got a printer who's going to donate the paper, the ink, and the labor to print brochures for you to promote it or something like that. You want to do the in-kind value of those goods and services. In this case, it would be the goods would be the paper and the printing, or the services would be the printing, the goods would be the paper to print it on, and if there would be an ink cost. You can either bundle those together in kind, or you could itemize them out, however you would want to do it. But that would not be in the cash column, because that would be donated goods and services. That would be in the in-kind column. So you're just going to use those 3 lists that you made before about what kinds of money's coming in is being put into the project, where you expect it to be coming from. If you are currently applying to, say, another grant, a foundation or something like that, and you have some kind of pending, you're hopeful that you're going to get some additional income, you can put that in on a line item, and you can put in parentheses like anticipated or pending or things like that. But that's always a really good thing to include, because it will help you help your grant reviewers know that you're looking for additional funding from other sources, or if you have partners who are going to like give you cash donations or give you in-kind donations, those are always really great things to put in there because that shows community support. So that's the income there. And so let's talk about the lower part of the budget, and that is starting at line 21 where it says expenses. So there's a very similar kind of thing here. The expenses, some things are going to be hard cash expenses that you're going to expect to go out to have to buy the things that you need to do the project, right? But you can also have some kind of in-kind items for expenses as well. So it's not as common, but you might have something like that you would want to put in there as well. Okay.
And Dawn, I'll
And
pause here to just say that if you include in kind in the top section, in the income section, you are also going to need to include it in the expenses section. Those two things should be the same. So in Dawn's example, we're getting some paper and some, printing layout design time contributed to this project on line 10. We also are going to include that as an in-kind expense, because otherwise, without that in-kind contribution, we would have had to pay $15,000 for those things. So what might be, I might change this a little bit. I'm gonna probably be more appropriate to list this as the organization that's contributing. So we'll say Joe's Printing Services is going to give $15,000 of in-kind contribution, including paper and their own staff time to the project. And the expense would be printing services. And instead of paying cash for that, it's in kind.
thanks, Deb. So you're also seeing under the expenses, and Deb's thanks for putting in some fake numbers, Deb. You're seeing that we're in the income, you're seeing a subtotal of $161,000 with the $20,000 in-kind donation income is making a total income of $181,000, okay? Deb's highlighting it so you can see that. And what Travel Oregon requires when you're submitting budgets is that the budgets be balanced. And so what does that mean? That means that if the total income, that subtotal that Deb just clicked on and highlighted at 181,000, that means that your expenses have to equal 181,000. Your expenses, meaning your cash expenses plus your in-kind expenses combined. So now you're seeing the bottom of the budget form, and you can see how there's this warning, not balanced. Please check your numbers. Deb, just put in something so folks can see how that changes to make the budget balance for 1 second. If you don't mind. See how that says balance looks great? So this is why you should not take our form and mess around with it and put it into other forms too, because you will lose that ability to make sure that your budget is balanced. So why does Travel Oregon insist on you putting in a budget estimate that is a balanced budget? Because
Dawn,
we want
to pause for a minute.
Yeah.
I just saw a question pop up that some people are not seeing the screen share. If that is the case, would other people, I think you can chat to the host, but Dawn, can you see it okay?
I can see it. My guess is look at the top bar of your Zoom screen. You might be on the meeting tab versus a tab that shows a little icon of Deb's photo and it says Deb Vaughn travel ... apostrophe S screen on mine.
Thank you, Dawn, for the troubleshooting. And just so you know, the webinar is being recorded. So if you have trouble seeing the screen share, we will post a recording of the webinar so that you can go back and look at it. So thank you for the pause, Dawn. Sorry to interrupt there.
Sure. I'm curious. Can the folks who had trouble before seeing it see it now? Or they look at the very top bar of your Zoom? Can someone?
And Shatrine, I may be saying your name wrong. My apologies. Feel free to unmute and chime in if you. Okay, looks like they got it back. So great. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Glad to have you with us. Okay, so Deb, do you mind clicking on that total income subtotal again? That 181,000, just so the folks who weren't on the screen before.
Yep.
So that total income, cash and in kind, that's in yellow, the 181,000 that Deb's highlighting the row of it right now, that needs to match row 40 in the bottom, which is the total expenses subtotal. And for you to have a balanced budget, your total income and your total expenses have to be the exact same number. And why is that? That's because we want to think at Travel Oregon that if we gave this applicant $150,000 like they're requesting, that they will be able to spend the $150,000 award, if we award it to them, out completely. So we want to make sure they have a good roadmap of what's coming in and how it's going to go out the door. And if there's if you were to say be unbalanced, either on the underside of being balanced or on the overside of being balanced, then potentially you either wouldn't be able to use the full funding, or you would not be able to complete the project because you run out of money for it. So we are aiming for like a one-to-one kind of balance heading into the project. That's why we're aiming to have you submit a balanced budget to us. And maybe that's a good place right now to pause for a second before we flip over and look at a sample budget.
I was just, that's great. There's some questions coming in and I'll answer some of those as I'm able, and some of them I'll hold for when we're all doing Q&A together. But Dawn, I just wanted to ask briefly, if you were a grant reviewer and you looked at this budget as I have it on the screen, would this tell you what you need to know to review this marketing proposal, or would you offer any suggestions?
Well, I've been paying more attention to my notes of what you're writing. So let me
Well,
look.
I mean, I secretly know the answer I was looking for, so I shouldn't have set you up that way. So I will say, I don't want to distract you from your notes. I would say that this line item here, row 26, in the expenses that says marketing materials, $161,000 that I put in as a placeholder, I would say that that is actually not providing enough information about what those materials might be. That's a very large budget figure for not a lot of information. I would go and look at the narrative to see if the narrative described in more detail what kinds of materials. Is it video? Is it printed? Is it billboards? But you could help provide clarity by line iteming those things out. So changing this to say billboard, maybe we're going to do some magazine ads in the local travel magazine. And maybe we're going to get some social media boosts of our video collateral.
Thanks. Thanks for answering the question. I agree with you. Are there other questions we should tackle before we hop into looking at the sample budget part of the form?
No, I think we're okay for now, and we'll loop back.
Okay, let's hop over to the down at the bottom. You'll see there's those tabs, the sample budget tab, which is in yellow. And hang on, I have to make my own view a little bit bigger so I can see what's going on here. Okay, so you'll see this is going to be in the budget form when you access it. If you just want to look at a sample budget, we've provided one for you. And it is good to just kind of hop through this because it will help us talk about how grant reviewers, and we will have a team of folks who will be reviewing the grant applications as we do for all of our grant applications. It helps to kind of think about things through the lens of what reviewers look for, just like Deb was just referring to as we were working through that other part of the budget form. So let's take a look at this one. So you'll see here that the grant applicant on line column C, line 6, has properly put in their amount that they're funding that they're requesting from this grant, which is $12,000. You'll see that they put that under the budget estimate side. And then you see that they've included a bunch of costs, both cash and in kind, in the budget estimate side. Once again, don't worry about the stuff to the right of the gray bar. That's the actual side. And that's what gets used when you're doing your final grant reporting. So just ignore everything to the right of the first gray bar in column E. Thanks, Deb, for highlighting that. Okay, so you'll see that they have a Friends organization of the Fairfield Zoo, and there's going to be an $8,000 contribution from the Friends organization to support the project. You'll see that they've got some in-kind income, a labor rate reduction from a designer working on this project. That's the Jane Smith LLC line item, which is on line number 9. And you can see that they've kind of itemized out with Jane Smith LLC that they're getting a reduced rate and what the hourly rate is and what the normal rate is. So you can kind of glean a few things from that. You've got someone working at a very competitive rate. They're also donating a little bit of in-kind, which is not a requirement, but it's kind of a nice thing. They probably have a good relationship with that vendor from past work together. So you can kind of look at that line item as a positive thing. And also the Friends organization. Let's talk about Friends organizations. If you're lucky enough to have a Friends organization or any kind of community organization that supports your work, it's always great to see what their contribution will be. Sometimes it's cash contribution, sometimes it's in-kind volunteer contributions, but both are of value and both speak well of your application and strengthen your application. So be sure to include any kind of like Friends organization or volunteer group or even individual volunteers.
And
In
Dawn,
your
in this example, I do want to point out, this is a little, because this could be confusing, is that up here in row 2, where we ask you to put the applicant's name, in this example, the applicant is actually the Friends of organization. So what that
Sorry.
tells me is that the Fairfield Zoo is a for-profit business or otherwise ineligible to apply. And so they're applying for support through their Friends of project, which is why this is a cash contribution, because the staff of their own organization is doing real work and being paid real money for the time that they're contributing to the project. If in the example that Dawn's pointing out, if the applicant was the Fairfield Zoo, if they were eligible, and there was a Friends of organization that was going to be including some staff time, then this $8,000 would likely move over to the in-kind column, because the applicant itself would not be paying the staff. That becomes a partner contribution. So that's one way in your budget that you can communicate partnership relationships.
Thank you, Deb, for that. You'll also see that on line 10, there's member donations. So that makes sense why that would be a cash donation. And so that would be the obviously the folks who are members to the organization donating to it. So that shows that the applicant is, again, putting forth some of the cash contributions that they can get to within their own organization or within their immediate family of their organization. And then you'll see that there's a city improvement grant there for $1,000. Again, this to review committee members will look like a really good thing, that the city's behind it, and that also that the fundraising team has raised funds elsewhere. Probably the most disadvantaged place you can put yourself in when putting in grant income information in a budget is to just list that you want the money only to come from your organization and from Travel Oregon, right? That doesn't mean that
Dawn,
you won't
why
get.
is that?
Yeah,
Tell
it doesn't
what
mean you won't
story?
get funding, but you're going to be competing against a bunch of other people who are going to be doing things more like this example that we show you, right? And so the conversation typically in the review committee room will kind of go down the path of who's got the most community support, who's able to, and it doesn't always mean like the people with the most dollars. Sometimes it's the people with the most partners.
That's
Even if
right.
those partners are giving like tiny amounts of dollars, it's not always dollars. It's about community support. And so sometimes it's great to have a bunch of dollars, but I think most of our review committees are well aware of the fact that smaller organizations, sometimes their strength comes through people power and volunteer and in-kind donations rather than through cash. Cash, it is always king, but sometimes people power is as much king or more impressive or can equal it. So just make sure you're valuing, if you've got a lot of in-kind stuff in your mix, make sure you're valuing that. But you definitely put yourself at a disadvantage if you're coming into this application saying, we want $20,000 from Travel Oregon, and we're going to put $5,000 of our own money in. You can
And
see
I would
how like that just being the money would not put you in a competitive spot. Sorry, Deb.
No, that's fine, Dawn. I was just going to emphasize that the story that tells me is that the applicant organization had a really great idea, and they think we at Travel Oregon would think it was a great idea, but they maybe haven't had some of those local level conversations to confirm that it is in fact a great idea. So again, it's about the story that your budget is telling and how that's backed up with your narrative. I would also say a suggestion that I would give to this example budget would be to include whether that city improvement grant is pending or secured. Dawn mentioned that earlier. Have you already applied? Are you waiting to apply? Is it you got it last year, so there's a good chance of renewal? You're welcome to include that kind of context. Dawn, we're getting a couple of questions that I would like to answer live about how to handle administrative overhead and administrative dollars. Should that just be a percent of the overall amount? Can we include it? So what kind do you, because we have about 20 minutes left, would you mind skipping ahead to that topic?
Sure, sure. So you can include, I assume you're talking about staff, when you're saying admin overhead, you're talking about staff time.
Yes.
So remember, this is a project grant. This is not a general operating grant, right? That would fund your general operations, your everything, all the money it takes you to run your organization. This is a project grant. So yes, you can include staff time, but it should only be staff time that you can directly attribute to this project. So that means you're going to have to figure out, like, if you have your ED working on it for X number of hours at whatever their rate is per this project. And then, like you're seeing in this budget example with the Jane Smith LLC line item, you want to write something similar like that to that. You want to write, the organization's names, executive director, 20 hours at blah, 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 rate related to this project. You want to just make sure to be really clear about it, that it's related to this project. And you're welcome to do that for your staff people. We understand that it requires staff to do these projects. So we want to make sure that you're paying the staff people for the project work. And that opens up another can of worms about volunteers versus people that you want to pay. And we'll get to that in 1 second. But let's talk about expenses first. That'll be a good segue into expenses, unless there's
And
more questions in the queue.
no, you're good, Dawn. Thank you. And I did just highlight on row 24. We do have an example here, although it only shows up in the actuals, because in this example, this was an unanticipated need. But you can see that the organization has in their final accounting of the project ended up needing to pay their own staff $50 an hour for 12 hours of work. And that it shows up as an actual cash expense in their final budget. So that is appropriate. The one other thing I would add about thinking about administrative overhead during the application is it is absolutely appropriate to include, and I have, as we've worked through the current cycle of grants, we have encountered some projects that did not include that in their initial budget, and now kind of as they get towards the end are finding themselves in kind of a pinch point. So I do think it's appropriate to think about some level of staff time expense or administrative overhead. But as Dawn said, as those percentages of the total project budget start to creep up and up and up, it can begin to raise questions from the reviewers about what are the dollars, what are our dollars funding directly. So it can be a delicate balance, but I don't want to dissuade anybody from considering including it. But you want to be thoughtful because this is a project and we do want to see a strong majority of the dollars on the project going directly out to the project.
Thanks, Deb. And another thing that comes up in this as part of this conversation often, a frequently asked question is about indirect costs. So indirect costs are things like, more related to running your organization, like electricity, rent. We always joke paper clips, but just all those things, big and small. And can you include an indirect cost in here? You can include some staff labor as an indirect cost. I'd be careful about including other indirect costs. Deb, do you want to weigh in on whether a portion of electricity or rent and things like that could be included?
I don't have a solid percentage, but I think it would probably be proportionally related to how heavy your own staff involvement is in the project. If you're primarily doing, say it's a marketing project, like in the example we looked at earlier, and you're going to be contracting out the majority of the design services, then a high percentage of paper clips for your organization wouldn't necessarily be appropriate. If instead you're looking for support for your own marketing team to do a special project, we might see a slightly higher administrative overhead. Again, Staff time is one thing. Staff time directly on the project is one thing. Administrative overhead, some sort of flat percentage of your paperclip budget, is a different thing. And that is probably less appropriate in this project grant program. The second one is less appropriate.
Thank you for that perspective. Let's talk expenses, the bottom half of the budget form. So again, you're ignoring the actual side, the right-hand side, and you're just in the budget estimate expenses. And this, going back to your 3 lists that you made originally, this should be a pretty easy one to fill out. This is going to be the costs of what you expect to have to pay for out of the project. Again, what you're aiming for in that total expenses, which is on line 27, column D, is to make sure that that matches the total income. So you have the balanced budget. And you can see in this example, it does. The total income is $24,000. That's cash and in kind together. And the total expenses is $24,000 cash and in kind together. So again, back to Deb's earlier point, if you have in kind in your budget estimate in the top half, you want to put the in kind going out as an expense in the bottom part of the budget. And then you want to list your hard costs, right? So what kind of things should you be paying for? This is a frequently asked question as it comes up about people. Obviously, if somebody here is buying and installing a bunch of signs, maybe their sign vendor is going to give them some in kind. Chances are probably not, and that's just going to be a hard cost. You're going to put that under the cash, like we're seeing on line 22, column C, a $5,000 hard cost in cash to install 50 signs by the Fairfield Sign Company. So you'll have those hard costs. But sometimes you'll have things like, I'm going to look at the one above it, the Valley Marketing Services, Inc. Project Oversight Bilingual Content Editing. You'll see that on line 21, column C again, $2,000. And so sometimes that's just going to be a hard cost. And then there is an interesting part in here in bilingual content editing. So sometimes people can get, say, something like that for free. Maybe you have a volunteer who says, well, I'm fluent in these 2 languages the signs are going to be made in. Like, let me just do that for you free. We want to make a clear point to you all about how free or paid for labor often plays out in the modern philanthropic world. Grant review committee members now in the contemporary world, it used to be a long time ago, it was like any donation is good. But I think the ideology of that has evolved over time. And the contemporary take on that at most organizations is if someone has an area of expertise and it's critical to the project that you're working on, that you should pay them for that expertise. We want to make sure that folks who have both acquired expertise and lived experience expertise, we consider those both to be valid and both to be worth paying for. So be careful about who you list as volunteer labor in terms of what kind of things they're doing. If you have a volunteer who's just coming to an event and they're helping you set up chairs and set up tables and things like that, that's great. Do that as in-kind volunteer labor. But if you have someone who's going to do any kind of like interpretation for you, going to bring any kind of cultural expertise or lived experience into the project that's critical to reach a group of people or to make the experience culturally accurate and engaging for the general public, we want to make sure that you are paying the people who are doing that important work. You want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, I think with that really important point, what I'd love to do with the time we have left, if it's okay with you, is stop screen sharing and open it up for questions for folks that might be more comfortable asking verbally instead of typing in the questions box. Does that feel all right to you, Dawn? Great, thank you. All right. Do that. So this is a great time if you'd like to turn your video on and see faces of colleagues. And I just want to pause. I'm sometimes struggle to leave silence in these spaces, but it is important so you can formulate your thoughts. So let's just give it, a good 30 seconds of quiet in case you have questions.
I see cameras coming on. I see
Yeah,
Linda.
great.
Hi.
Hi, this is Linda English with 30 Free Hub. My question really stems around from how far should I drill things down to? Is there sort of a magic number that you should be looking for? We're working on a marketing campaign. I can get very, very granular with those numbers at this point, or I can stay very top level. I'm afraid about saying too top level and you saying, well, there's not enough information here for me to make a decision. So can you maybe help me make a decision on that?
Yeah, Linda,
Sure.
one of the things I'll say in this grant program is when you submit but you will need to submit a budget with your LOI. But you will have the opportunity to revise that budget if you're invited to the full application. So a lot of what I'm doing as I'm reviewing the LOIs is I'm saying, I see where you're headed with this, but in your next budget, I'd like to see a little bit more detail about this and that. So my recommendation, if you're unsure, is it's probably okay to keep it a little more top line in your LOI budget. And then if we want you to dive deeper in the application, we will. That being said, the example I showed where it just said marketing project and it had the full amount of the request, that is not enough detail, probably even in the LOI. So I would do a little bit of a breakdown, but you don't need to go in too much detail at this point. Was that enough of a non-answer? I know last week you and I met and I didn't answer any of your questions because I dodged all of them. So I'm still on that.
I would add this too.
Yeah.
Make sure your budget looks like you've done your due diligence,
Wow.
right? Like it doesn't, sometimes you can do an application really quickly and there's nothing wrong with that if it's done well. But
Mhm.
when people see a budget that just has like one or two line items in it, sometimes people just think, do they really know what it's going to cost? Have they really drilled down enough? So, we only give you so many spaces, Linda, to work in. So you can't err on this. Oh, look at that. I just got balloons across the screen. You can't err on the side of drilling down too much. We put those parameters on for you, but I would definitely encourage you to like submit a budget where it becomes to the reviewers that you've done due diligence in thinking through what the project's going to cost and how you're going to fund it.
Ariel. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So I am working on funding a project that's been in operation since 1984, and we're trying to finally get this finished here in Baker City, Oregon. And we've raised 60%, 70% of the funds so far. One of the things that we haven't taken into account is all of the time that we've spent on this project, obviously in the past, but obviously now too, since I'm a paid employee, the time that I'm now spending on this project, mainly just because the project budget is already like $1.3 million. And so it seems kind of silly to include my time in that as well. Is that important at this point? It's something obviously I'm leaving out of the budget. But again, because the focus is building a physical space, I just really haven't been focused on tracking my time or anticipating that. Do you think that will impact things at all?
I think it may not be a deciding factor, but I think a question could potentially arise in the review process about how is this very large construction project going to be managed and overseen? So if you don't address it at all, there could be a question about capacity there. So I think at the very least, it would be important to include in your narrative that you're making an intentional choice not to include your time, but that project management responsibilities will be handled by staff. Because otherwise, I think that would, especially in a very significant large project like that, who's going to make sure that it gets done? Who's going to check the quality and pay the invoices? So for those reasons, including some of your time going forward, right? We're not going to cover back pay for work outside the project time, but I think that would probably create a stronger budget. And if you're being paid anyway, right, it should, right, your account, right, it would come at the revenue would come from your own organizational operating budget. So it would balance. Dawn, you were going to add.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to say, I can't tell you how many grant review committees I've sat on in my life and how many different organizations where I've heard the phrase, these people are almost done with this many years long project. If we awarded them, we'd just kick it over the finish line for them, right? So if you, I don't know if your project you're close to the finish line, but for anybody here, if you're close to the finish line, be sure that is clear, because it just appeals to this human nature of the people on the review committee to want to try to help get you there, right?
Thanks, Ariel. So we have a few more minutes. I did put the email address grants@traveloregon.com in the chat. So if you have a question that's very specific to your application or that didn't get answered here, please reach out to us via email and we can respond to you. I also want to plug that we have two more formal applicant support opportunities coming up later this week. So one is Wednesday morning and one is Friday afternoon. And those are just literally open drop-in hours. I will sit alone in a Zoom meeting for an hour. And if you register and get the link and pop in at any time during that hour, I am happy to speak with you if you have a last minute question as you're approaching that deadline. During that time, I'll probably also be responding to emails and or looking at LOIs. So that time is set aside just as a drop-in time, no pressure. And if you just want to come say hi because you enjoy conversation with me, that's great too. I'd love the break. But those are the last two formal sessions in preparation for the LOI deadline next week. Okay, I see a thumbs up.
Questions about the budget form?
Yeah.
Those are
I'm so
usually-
excited to see all these great, strong budgets coming in. It's gonna be awesome. Linda's face. Bye. All right. Well, with that, I will just say thank you to Dawn for all of the great content and the mind meld on this. Thank you to April for the tech support and answering some of the questions in the background. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate the time. I hope some of this was helpful context and information. And if you have any troubles with the budget form, feel free to reach out and we'll help you do some tech troubleshooting as well if that's needed. Help you get it turned in and hope we see LOIs from all of you by next Wednesday. All right. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Take care,
everybody.
everyone.